It's like when somebody tells you your tongue is uncomfortable in your mouth, or you can see your nose and stuff, which we've talked about on the podcast before. Like,
not at the beginning of it, though. No, I don't think about it the whole time. And I won't be able to think about routines.
Oh, routines?
Routines. That's what we're talking about today.
What?
Routines.
Never would have guessed that it's routines, really. This is like
you would not have guessed.
out of pocket. I didn't read the title of the podcast.
I honestly, I sent you like 12 emails, a few texts.
Yeah, you told me I should research.
I shared the doc with you. The
what now?
The outline.
The what?
The like Google Doc that has the outline in it that tells us where we're going to go.
I'm sorry, that was all gibberish to me.
You've never had a doc before.
I don't. Who, a doctor?
Yeah, a doctor.
No.
Yeah, no, I sent Dr. Rick Astley to come and hand you this paper. I don't know why I chose Rick Astley.
He gave it to me, and it just said, I'm never going to give you up. I'm never going to let you down. I'm never going to run around and desert you. Wait, is that the words? Something like that. Don't look that up. What is this show, Noah?
This is Noah Asked, and today I'm asking about routines. What's been on my mind recently is we're going to start school in a couple weeks.
Oh, and crap.
Yeah, that's basically whenever I think about this podcast. I'm like, hey, routines. Hey, school's coming up.
Ugh, we've got to do more of these so we have to work less hard during school.
Right? It's spooky. But with our season break and stuff, it'll line up nicely with school. As school is starting back up, there's lots of things in my life that are about to change, like kind of talking about this podcast. Like I'm going to have to find new places for that, maybe like bulk record a couple of them if we can, find different places for like my D&D stuff, and work's going to have to change. And I was like, everything's just kind of getting tossed in the air. And I'm not the only one, because we also have people who are starting out for the first time, and we have people who are moving from different towns to come here and transfer and things like that. And all their routines are just kind of going to be changed in shambles.
Yeah, we're going to be thrown together into a melting pot. We're going to be given a routine that is completely different from the rhythm that we have come to know and love during summer, which is mostly, it seems like, either breaking our backs trying to work or crashing hard as soon as we get home and recording, in our spare time. So it's going to be crazy because everybody has their own rhythms.
I feel like my summer routine is a lot of all or nothing. So it's like I'm at work and I'm like working hard, and then I get to come home and I just get to like sleep. I get to play video games. I get to record a podcast. I don't have a whole lot of like middle ground work that I just like constantly need to be looking at. So I feel like when school comes around, it's like, oh, I'm going to have to like do a little bit of schoolwork today and then work for a few hours at work. And then I'm going to have to then study for a couple hours, then maybe like record a podcast for an hour. I'm going to have to break stuff up into a bunch of intermediate tasks instead of like these big long tasks like I've been doing.
Yeah, it gets to be a lot. So how do you deal with that?
It's tricky. I don't know if I'm the best at switching my routines. I feel like some people are better at it than others.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I'm pretty good about taking my routine and kind of flipping it on its head. I don't want to say I thrive from it, but I'll say that I almost thrive from it. I feel like when I flip my routine around, I find bits and pieces of both my old and my new schedules that I've put together that work really well. So sometimes I'll be like, say I've got 2 classes on Monday, and those 2 classes take up my morning, but then that means my afternoon can be dedicated to other things that work different parts of my body or my brain. For instance, when school comes around, I feel like I get a lot better at going to the gym. 1, I have more access to the gym. 2, I make it like a class, and especially because I have access to the on-campus gym, it's like, oh, I just show up at 8 a.m. I go to the gym, I work out for an hour, so then I have time to shower, change, walk to my class, do that, and then I'm on campus until the end of that. Then I come home and I just go to a completely different mindset to work on other things, like the podcast or photography or study for classes if I need to.
But during the summer, it's like, you can work out whenever.
Yeah, it gets dangerous because I'm like, oh, wow, my schedule is so open, so I can shove my workout anywhere, which means it doesn't go anywhere.
Exactly. It's like, oh, I'll run this morning. It's like, something came up. I'll run tonight. And then it's actually, I'm pretty tired. So
yeah, your routine gets a lot less set during the summer, so it gets harder to stick to some unless you have a lot of resolve for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that works. Having more availability makes it harder to do certain tasks. The illusion of choice just, I don't know.
Like runs your life. They used to tell me in my acting class that it's easier to act inside of a box than it is to act outside of a box. And what they mean by that is if you're given a time limit and you're told to improv, you will have a much harder time acting out a 7-minute scene from nothing than if they tell you act out a scene that's 7 minutes long, make it up, but you have to be on this park bench and it has to do with this apple and it has to have a veterinarian in it. And now you can make a 7-minute skit way easier because you have these kind of confines. You have a location, an object, you have a person.
Clearly this has to interact in this way and this has to interact with this way. And it's the same thing with schedules where it's like, well, I can go to the gym whenever, but that means I have to like get up, get dressed and drive. Where it's like, I already have this built-in time where I have to get up, get dressed and drive anyways to the location that's already next to the gym. So why not just do it then? That confine almost helps you more than it hurts you.
And I think as people, we kind of want a routine anyways. You see a lot of this kind of stuff happens to people who have just graduated where they just kind of get like this weird post-college depression because now you no longer have this routine and sometimes jobs don't exactly come crawling out of the woodwork. So you're just left with yourself and your own resolve trying to come up with a way to stay happy. And, you know, if you fall out of routine, things get kind of tough. Humans need that kind of backbone of structure, or a lot of humans do.
Have you noticed switching your routines, and especially with school and starting up each new semester, has that gotten easier or harder for you?
I think it's gotten easier for me since high school. And that's just because I start to look forward to going to classes in different places. In high school, you're like, okay, here's a campus. You know exactly where the rooms are, especially in the high school where we went. It was just like one place. You knew all the rooms. You knew who was going to be in those rooms. Whereas in college, you're going to have this one class on the second floor with this one person you've never heard of before. And so now you're like, oh, I guess I need to figure out where this is. And I need to figure out how long it takes me to walk there. And it becomes more of an adventure. And so that's what I like about it, is the kind of toss up and routine. But I know a lot of people like okay, I know exactly where I'm going. I know what these classes are. It's harder for them to settle in. But once they get settled in, they're like dead set, you know, like they have trouble changing their routine at all. Where do you kind of fall on that?
I am a weird mix of both because when something new happens, I do find it exciting to like figure out where it is, and knowing what this class is going to be and knowing who this teacher is going to be is all very interesting to me. But I'm also like terrified of like failure and looking stupid. So it is a little spooky in that way. And so I think there is a little rush to like changing up your routine and starting something new. But once you get into the routine, there is also the comfort in knowing exactly what you're going to do. But there's also like the monotony and the boringness of it. I think I do like changing my routines. I've done it a lot in life. And so I think it is something that I've kind of grown accustomed to.
Yeah, I think it feels good to get a routine like given to you as well, because a lot of the time with these classes, it feels like you're told, okay, these are the classes you need to take. These are the classes that fit in the times. And then you just kind of like pick one with an advisor and you're like, okay, I want to do this class for sure this semester. And like, cool, it's on these days. You're like, whatever, that's fine. I know what days it's available. So I also want to do this class. And you just kind of start weeding out where things are able to fit. And then you're given a schedule that you more or less didn't like super have to work hard for, because they do most of it for you. And so I think that's what's really fun is like, okay, I like chose this schedule, but then it's given to me as like, here is your dead set plan for the week of what you're going to do every week until you die. Until you die in the winter, until you hit December and you freeze to death. No, I just like that I didn't have to put work into it. It's like, oh, cool. Now I just follow this thing, and as long as I follow this thing, then I'll be cool and it'll be good.
Yeah, when I was picking out my schedule, KU, and I think a lot of universities at this point have this like nifty little like engine that crafts schedules based on like available classes and stuff and just like throws all the options at you. And now you can just like click through them and like they just pop up in their different locations and where they would be. And I was at like my like third one and I was like, I think I like this one. And then I clicked through like 100 more and I was like, nope, I liked number 3. And so basically it just handed it to me, one of the first things. And I was like, you know me, you got this.
Yeah, it's like this computer understands what I need. That's fine. It's fun. It's like a little game.
Yes. Have there been any specific semesters that have started out rough for you, or the routine change was a little too much?
Yeah, I think my first semester out of high school was really rough. Just going to a new place, and of course I went to a different college than we go to now. It was much smaller, so I felt like anything that I did to embarrass myself would be more noticed than if I like go here. For instance, I walked into the entirely wrong classroom on my very first day. And not only did I walk into the wrong classroom, I walked into the wrong door, which meant instead of coming in to the back of this lecture hall, I came into the very front next to the professor. So I came in.
And everyone just staring at you.
Everybody can immediately see me. I look at the professor and he goes, yes. And I go, never mind. And I walked out. And then he's like, huh. first day, and then everybody laughed, and I was like, that doesn't necessarily feel great. Like, I don't know any of those people, but there was about 150 people in that classroom, and the chances of one of them seeing me on this campus of 760 is pretty high.
Last semester I did the same thing where I walked into a classroom, and it was one of the first classes of the day, so most of the buildings weren't open up yet, and so everyone was sitting out waiting in front of the classroom, and they're right in front of the door that I needed to be at. And I was like, oh, great. So I'll just sit down and wait for them. And then when the teacher came, they unlocked the door and we all went in. It turns out I got funneled into the wrong group of people.
Oh, no.
And so I was literally just one classroom over. I had ended up going into the wrong door. And 5 minutes in, 4 guys just stand up and bolt out. And then the teacher's like, guess they're in the wrong classroom. And I'm just over there like, dumbasses. And then like 2 minutes later, I'm like, oh, I'm the dumbass.
Oh, no. It's crazy how much we just kind of like follow the herd sometimes, though. I think that kind of goes in like with the routine things. We just like to kind of be led in a direction. And yeah, I've done the exact same kind of thing with a group of people where we were all sitting outside of a door waiting for it to be unlocked because the person before us was like sitting there and we're like, oh, cool, classroom's locked, we're waiting for whoever. Until one random person walked up to the door and opened it, and then everyone just like looked at each other and we all just stood up and walked into the classroom, and the professor was already in there just like, I was wondering when the class would show up. Like,
your eyes were all just waiting
so
outside.
Stupid, just waiting. Oh my
man.
gosh, it was.
Turns out that person wasn't even for that class. They were just like needed a place to sit for a second.
They're like, I don't know. I don't want to be in the hallway like a bunch of losers. But here we were, just sheep, one just following the other, blind.
Starting up at new places can be tricky. As like my first semester at a university, I went to the wrong classroom. Your first semester, you went to a wrong classroom. It's hard. And so I was wondering if you had any tips for new students.
Yeah, you should visit your classrooms before the classes open.
Good call.
So
it's also just kind of like a fun adventure. It's just kind of worthwhile to like see the campus if you like didn't get a good enough tour the first time.
yeah, and a lot of like these bigger universities, they give very generalized tours to you. So they'll be like, hey, this is the engineering building. Moving on. It's
And you're like, wait, that's 6 stories, 2 subsections. There's a basement. Like,
it's like, what's in there? It's like
what's
a lot of
45,622? What room is that?
Yeah, I don't know. Oh my God, are you talking about Westco?
It's insane.
I have never been in there, but all I hear is that Westco is a nightmare. What were you saying before that? Oh yeah, no. Visit your classrooms the day before classes open, because then you're going to get a layout of the campus, understand exactly where they are, and don't be afraid to ask faculty members and staff for help, because they're more than willing to help you. And most of the time, it's not going to be like, what a stupid kid. It's going to be like, oh yeah, this like sweet little child came up to me and asked me where room 2047A was. And I was like, it's over there, young man.
I've spent 70 years here, and I have mastered these labyrinths.
I know exactly all of the nooks and crannies where you can hide. It's like, do you know where 2045B is? I'm sorry, what now? I'm sorry, where 2047B? No, that's a different number than the first time. I don't quite know. There's no 2000.
Where'd the B come from? There was an A last year.
They just turn into an ostrich and then run away. I'm like, what was that?
They shed their human skin.
They shed their tiny human form and run away. They were the trickster ostrich of the campus. And it was like, what? Why did nobody tell me about this? And see, now you have a leg up on the rest of the class, because not only do you know where the classroom is, but you know to be wary of the old man who's really an ostrich.
So yeah, that's the perk of exploring the campus.
For sure. Get to know it and like get out. Be adventurous, because there's a lot of cool things even on our campus I haven't gone to, and I really should. I should just take the time to
People
walk
always
around.
talk about like these like great study spots and these like cool little hangouts, and I'm like, but that building's so far away. But it's really just like across the street from another place I go.
It's like, oh yeah, I walk by that every day, but like, why would I stop in there? I don't have any classes in there. Whatever.
Starting at a new college, a lot of people move in from out of town. They're these non-local students. Do you think they're at a disadvantage from local students? Because they have the added pressure of moving to a new place and having to deal with all your daily life routine changes along with the school routine changes.
Yeah, I think they're put at a disadvantage in a lot of ways just because their entire life is flipped on its head. if you look at it from the perspective of a kid who maybe grew up in the area and just gets to live at home, they don't even have to move. They don't have to change anything. They get all their meals made for them still. They could even like possibly get a ride to school. So it's no different from going to high school in the place. Whereas for me, moving from home to, and I've moved to both colleges I've gone to, but moving from Salina to Lawrence felt the most impactful and routine changing to me, because I had already kind of undergone it once when I went to Kansas Wesleyan, but I immediately made friends there. And coming here, I expected to kind of fall into the same routine of, oh, I'm going to go to my classes. I'm going to immediately make some friends. Everything's going to be just fine. It wasn't that way. Everything wasn't just fine. I moved in. I had really shitty roommates. I had to ride a bus to class, which I had never, ever done before. I went to class. I didn't immediately make friends like I thought I would. I got lost multiple times trying to find classrooms because I went to a much smaller school. Now I go to a very large school. I go to a large school, and I felt at a disadvantage for sure. But now that I've been here for a year, I'm right into it. It doesn't even faze me.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing about routines is it just takes time to switch into them, and then that becomes your new routine, and then you have to change away from that when it was so hard to change to it at one point.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's kind of like the thing that happens when you move and you're like, oh yeah, I'm at the new apartment, and everything you talk about, you're saying that it's going to happen at the new apartment and that you're going back to the new apartment and so on and so forth, and then eventually one day you're just like, I'm going home.
Yeah.
And it's just that routine has settled in, and now you're just like, oh, well, this is normal to me now. And it's weird how quick we kind of adjust. Like for me, it was almost like when we moved to this apartment, it was like a month, and I just called it home. I was like, whatever, I'm going home now. Of course, that helps me a little. It helps with me being like, I haven't lived with my parents in years now.
Yeah.
So it's like, wherever I move now, it's wherever I take off my hat. I don't wear a hat, but wherever I take off my hat and my jacket, that's home to me now.
For me, I don't have like a childhood home. So where my parents live is not my home because I've never lived there. Yeah, that can't be my home. So I guess you just kind of have to adapt and say, hey, I'm an adult now and this new place is my home.
Yeah, it is kind of a weird thing. I guess we both share that a little bit. Like my childhood home is in a place that has like great memories for me, but also the place that my mom lives right now is somewhere that I never lived like as a kid. Like she didn't move there until after I had gone to college. You know, she got remarried and stuff. So my like home with my mom isn't a home anyways, even though like she's doing her best to make it feel homely. She's like, oh, you have a place to stay here always.
She's there and your sister's there, but it's not yours.
It's not mine, it's theirs. So I'm like, okay, I have a lease now, mother. I don't need you anymore. I don't need your support. Don't listen to the podcast.
And then you get that nice little letter in the mail like, hey, you're going to need a co-signer if you want to get this new apartment.
I'm like, hey, mom, I need you. Remember how I said I didn't? Well, I lied. I'm still in my angsty phase. It's because I was homeschooled for 4 years. I'm still catching up, mom.
Amy, I don't need you. And then it's like, oh, you pay my insurance and my phone bill? Wait, and you've been sending me money? What? I haven't been living on my own?
Wait a minute, is that what it's like to be white? I have to pay all those things.
I wasn't ready for this. I thought I was an adult.
Being an adult is a weird thing because there's a difference between being an adult and being a real adult.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I consider us adults.
Okay.
I do not think we're real adults. Like a real adult to me is, oh, I have benefits through my job and I work through the week and I live for the weekend and I grill on Labor Day and I have a house with a 30-year mortgage or whatever. It's just like, that's a real adult.
I think that's something that's changing as a society, where that's kind of what the idea of like the real adult is, the perfect adult, having your home and like your grill and your dogs and your kids.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, now people aren't getting mortgages and buying houses. They're renting their entire lives. They're getting married super late. They're not having kids. And so it's like, what is an adult now?
I don't know. An adult is like a guy with a sweet beard, tattooed arms, being muscular and wearing a vest. That's what a man is.
That's what a man
Look,
is.
I don't know if anybody anybody can find the image I'm thinking of, but I hope you can, because there's this really great image of like a hipster looking grandpa guy like putting on his vest, and he's just got like these sick
I know
forearms.
what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the kind of grandpa I want to be. Fucking ripped. I want to be a freaking...
That's the only quality I want as a grandpa, is ripped.
Yeah, I want to be a ripped grandpa, not a grandpa who got ripped. You know what I'm saying?
One day you're like too nice to your kid, and he's like, "Oh, you're my nice grandpa," and you're like, "No, that's not what I want."
You just backhand him. You just have a handful of rings.
Chokehold him.
you put
You
your arm
feel
up.
this bicep on your neck.
You just like, you're holding him, and then you do the thing where you flex and it chokes him. You ever gotten that done to you?
Oh, I've got that.
Doesn't feel good. Like, wow, my arms don't even change size.
I was about to say, have you ever tried to do it to someone and it doesn't affect them at all? That doesn't feel good either.
You have to like fake it and like just like close your arm, and you're just like, yeah, you feel that? That's a bicep, and they can't see it, so they're like, oh my god, he's so strong.
Me choking my 4-year-old second cousin.
Noah
I'm so strong.
Noah abusing
Tell me
children.
I'm strong.
He's dead on the floor. You're like, oh god, too hard. We didn't want that one anyways.
No, he was weak. Obviously, if I could beat him up, he was weak.
So yeah, that's the kind of grandpa I want to be. I would like to weed out the kin of mine that are not strong enough to withstand my biceps. But back to routines.
Good stuff. For us, moving into apartments happened a lot during college, and that like molded us in very different ways. For me, I think it helped a lot because I moved in January, but I didn't start school until the next fall, that September. And so I had that like 5-month period to lock down my daily routine, get my job, get my daily life settled. And then I just added school on top of that. And so it was like a multi-level integration thing.
Yeah, you took it in kind of steps. So rather than people who are like moving specifically for college, they sometimes don't even get to like see the place they're staying. They just like call ahead. They're like, oh, this is student housing. That's a big thing. We could do a whole episode on how people are gouging students for apartments that aren't even that nice. But yeah, they call these places, they get it reserved, they pay their whatever, their down payments and stuff. And then the first time they see it is when they're moving in and school starts like the very next week or whatever. So they don't have time to adjust to travel in this new place, adjust to these new people and these routines and stuff. So you took it and kind of like, I don't want to like put it down in any way, but like you took it almost in easy mode where it's like you allowed yourself to do that. But really, it shouldn't be looked down on. When I say easy mode, that sounds derogatory. You took it the smart way.
For sure, yeah, because it was easy mode. I also was able to get all A's my first semester, and like it didn't feel like a struggle because I already had my other stuff down pat. And so like trying to change my work schedule, I didn't feel like I was hassling someone who just gave me a job because it was like, oh, you've known this was coming up, things like that.
Yeah.
Just the little things get a lot easier when you can like pat down some stuff and then layer stuff on top of that afterwards.
I think it's a good way to go about setting routines too, is like not piling too much on at once. You shouldn't go into something being like, oh yeah, I'm going to immediately put 40 hours a week into X hobby or whatever, you know? You should kind of work up to it slowly. I think a good analogy for this is like running. You shouldn't go into something thinking you're going to sprint a mile. You should go in thinking, oh, I'm going to jog for half a mile and power walk for the other half, and then just slowly
I
work
just
up
have to
things.
make 2 miles today. No matter how I do it, I just have to accomplish 2 miles.
Yeah, I think it's a good mindset for routines. I want to give myself enough time to plan this out that I don't have to do a 40-hour week job and school. I'll just focus on doing my 40-hour week job and then do that so that it gets easy, and then I'll cut back for school and make time for both.
That would be something that I would recommend, is like if you could take the time, or if you're already like in a weird position, kind of like I was, where I hadn't chosen a school yet and things, and I was moving separately from that reason, you know, to give yourself a little extra time if you can. I know a lot of people want to jump in right out of high school and like go to this university and be a part of things. For some people, I think it works out really nice socially because you're with all the other freshmen who are just starting out, but there's also some benefits the other way.
Just do whatever you think is best for you. Like, nobody knows your personality quite like you do. Even your parents. I mean, no offense to parents out there, but a lot of parents like shove their kids into things a little bit too early or too whatever. It's like, follow your heart when it comes to that kind of stuff, because you kind of know what you can handle, you know?
So we had to change our routines ourselves, being adults and moving. but moving can be a big impactful event your entire life. Being an adult, getting a new job and having to like move halfway across the country, or being a kid and having to switch schools and stuff like that. And so I kind of wanted to dive into that and ask you how moving has affected your life.
As an adult or as a kid?
Both.
So as a kid, I remember it affecting my life way more than it affects me as an adult. As a kid, I think you build bonds with people a lot faster purely because you're a kid. I don't know. You just kind of start to trust people and learn what you like from people.
And I feel like that would make it a little easier. I don't know. You said more impactful. That makes me think like it was harder on you. Being able to know people really quickly is a really benefit of being like a young kid anyways, where it's just like, hey, you're sitting next to him and you are now best friends.
I mean, that's, in a sense, I think that helps, but also at the same time, having to go through that process multiple times can't be like that easy. For instance, I didn't have it anywhere near as much as you did as a kid, but I remember I moved from Arizona to Kansas, and then I moved around Kansas for a while until we finally settled in Ellsworth. So
when did you settle in Ellsworth?
I think it was first grade, but I moved around quite a bit before that, where it was like we stayed there for a while, and I stayed there long enough to become friends with a neighbor, and I stayed there long enough to make friends at like the local like preschool or whatever, and then it was all just like changed a bunch. Because I remember I went here in Lawrence, then I went to Holyrood, and then I ended up in Ellsworth. And each time I like made friends that I thought would be with me for a while, and then I remember like moving and being really sad that I had lost these friends, or I like had to leave the bedroom that I had, or had to leave, whatever, because I just like grew super attached to these specific things very quickly. And then when we like finally stayed in Ellsworth, it was fine, no big deal. And then I became an adult, and now I don't have connections to anything. Almost like it's really interesting because almost as soon as I moved out of the house, I had this mentality of like home is where you hang your hat kind of thing. It doesn't affect me at all. Like I feel like I could move across the country and be totally fine because I only really have a few friends here. So moving and losing those connections like physically doesn't hurt me either. We grew up in a society that's very connected. If I moved across the country, you and I could still Skype or whatever else and keep in touch.
Yeah, I think I've gone through the transition to where when I moved first as a kid, I could call people on the telephone and, sit at my landline for an hour just like talking to them. And then I've gone from like, oh, now we can talk on our cell phones whenever, to we can text, to we can Skype. And then it just gets a lot easier in a lot different ways that we can communicate now. And so it's kind of cool to see that transition over my childhood.
Yeah. What was it like for you? I kind of like answered very vaguely. I don't have a whole lot of experience in that, but you have a lot.
Yeah, I've moved a few times, and
a few times.
A few times. I was really interested in this topic, and so I kind of did some research into it. Personally, my big moves were preschool. I left Wichita to go to preschool in Anthony, which is a much smaller town, and then from preschool to third grade, I was in Anthony, and then I moved to Ellsworth, and then I spent a lot of time in Ellsworth for my early high school years. I moved to Austin, and then back to Ellsworth eventually, and then off to Kansas City, and then to here. And I'm going to say that I don't really remember the first one from Wichita to Anthony. It seemed like Anthony was a real easy transition. So preschool didn't have a whole lot of effect on me. And then third grade was scary because I realized like what was happening, and I knew I was losing friends and and places and things that were familiar. But I did the exact same thing that I said earlier, where a teacher sat me next to someone who ended up being our friend James. And we just became like best friends right away. And we just kind of grew up and hung out together for the next few years. And so that seemed like a relatively easy transition. And then I think it was the high school ones that were a lot harder. Once people already kind of have their cliques and their bonds and stuff set, trying to like hop in on that and like become a part of these cliques is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I think it's very much the same when it comes to moving to like colleges and new places and stuff. People already have their established groups and such, so getting in on them becomes tough. So I think when you get older, it seems like the move itself isn't as mentally strenuous, but making friends becomes a lot harder.
I would say that the emotional toll is a lot less as you get older. You just get like more used to things, and like possessions and places aren't quite as important to you. But like trying to regain stability to that like previous norm is a little more difficult because you are isolated in your own little apartment. You're not forced to go and talk to people like you are in like high school and middle school and things like that. And so it is a little more difficult in that way.
So would you say building your routine around social aspects helps with moves? If you move to a place with a social routine kind of built into it. So you have a
Like
job,
a support system.
yeah,
Things like
you
that.
have a job that's there, or you have maybe like an improv group that you have decided you're going to go and be part of or whatever. Like, would you say that adds stress to the move, knowing that you have to do those things, or would you say that takes away some stress?
I would say that takes away some stress. I think having some like people there, because humans are very social creatures, and just like having that time to where you can like hopefully bond and meet with someone can really help you out a lot. Harder to do as an adult. And so if you do have something like that where you can meet people, I think it is very beneficial to try and like hop on that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I was just curious what your take on was it, because I know you're a little bit more introverted than I am when it comes to like.
I think being an introvert makes it harder to like choose to do those things and like put myself in those situations. But like once I'm there, I think it's easier to like have that because the benefits are long term, whereas like the struggle is short term. Like I said, I've had quite a bit of personal experience moving around. And so I did do some research trying to understand what science had to say about it, like what the numbers were, if it like had a negative impact on you, or if it like kind of scarred children to be like pulled from their homes and things like that. And I think it's something a lot of people feel.
So you're trying to decide whether or not your parents messed you up by ripping you from your.
Yeah, and now
your
I'm going to
childhood.
expose them on a podcast that they
Yeah.
listen to.
Yeah, Amy and Jeff, listen real good to these numbers to tell you how bad you messed up Noah.
What it seemed to show, I have a couple different studies. One study showed from ages 0 to 9. Basically, what they gathered was the number of times moved didn't really affect the child at any age except like before the age of 2. So if you move the kid from say like 9 months to 2 years old, that could have had a mental effect on them, making them more emotionally like distant, make them more likely to have emotional outbursts and things like that, but only from that very specific range, whereas the other ages didn't really affect them that much. The kid that age understands that the parents are going through a lot of stress and trying to like figure things out, and they're worrying about their kid and like wondering what's going to happen to them, and they can see that, but they can't communicate how they feel or their scaredness, and they can't really understand like what's going on. That can have an impact on the kid. Then once they're like able to comprehend and like communicate their feelings, moving at those ages isn't as big of a deal because they are able to just adjust really quickly with make friends really easily. And I was like, oh, so moving doesn't affect you. But what I was seeing is later studies showed that the big key important ages are middle school and high school. Those are the big ones where you're right at the peak where you don't understand your emotions super well. So you don't have that like resolve to just like make this new place yours. But you're also in that place where the social aspect doesn't just come super easily. I had a nice little graph that was showing more likely like suicide attempts, substance abuse, violent outbursts, and things like that were all increased, specifically heading towards the ages of like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. It exponentially grew. And the number of moves within a year also rose that exponentially. Basically, if you moved a kid a lot during like high school, middle school years, their likelihood to do illegal acts and stuff like substance abuse and violent acts is more likely to increase.
Did they give a reason why in those studies, or was it just like
I didn't specifically see a reason why. It was just kind of like going based off of these children's behavior exams that they had taken, just the numbers behind how much they did move.
what was it, between 0 and 2 or whatever the moves?
Yeah, and they tried to explain that, with the not being able to communicate. And then from like 2 to 8, there was like basically no difference if you moved. And then it just like slowly, steadily grew as you went from like 8 to 15.
Interesting.
And then they didn't go beyond, I don't think, 14 in that study. But I would assume it would slowly begin to bell off and start to go back down as you
get older and like more matured, and you
and
understand
the moves are
stuff.
your decision, not other people's decisions.
Yeah, having more control in that. That's so interesting. I hadn't even thought about the like, the 2 and under kind of age.
Yeah, that's what I found was really interesting. So I really like that little piece of information.
Little tidbit there. It appears that there's a correlation, whether it's causation or anything, between moving around and understanding your emotions and the emotions of those around you. Because as a kid, you don't get either. So of course it's going to be stressful. And then growing up, you're like, you kind of don't care almost, and then later on you're undergoing your own changes, so you don't understand what's going on inside you, but then things are changing outside, whether it's like the people and the places or whatever. So of course it's going to be like tumultuous and a little bit difficult. Very, very interesting. I wonder if that affects, because I was homeschooled during those years. I was taken from public school into a homeschool setting, so I had less social interaction and more introspective kind of things happening with me there. What led to some interesting
something like
places.
that, where you lived outside of town and you're homeschooled and then began to become public schooled, might almost count as a move. It seemed to have a lot of the same effects of like interrupting your social standing and kind of messing with what you had kind of established in your head.
Yeah, it's super odd. It's super. I mean, I would say that being homeschooled didn't mess me up, but it definitely didn't not hurt me. Like as far as like social standing and that kind of stuff goes, and like understanding social norms and reading those kinds of things. Not to say that I'm socially inept now. I think I do pretty okay, but at the same time, it's like there's some things that every now and then I'm like, I mean, that doesn't make sense to me, why that offended that person or why this went that way. I guess no one's to say whether or not that's from that or from just the fact that I'm stupid. I want to try these transition noises.
Next question.
I once got told that making noises and doing stuff like that in between like takes comes from this isn't to make you feel self-conscious, because it definitely made me feel self-conscious. Doing those things between takes is you trying to make it okay that you don't know what to say or that you're making a mistake, and so you're trying to turn it into a joke, but really you should just be spending that time working on the next take, is what I was told, because it was like a digital performance class, and I used to do things like I'd mess up on reading. I'd be like, and just like continue. And they're like, yeah, what that is you being unconfident in what you're doing. And so that little, and I'm like, oh, well, that sucks. I mean, I guess I am just going for a laugh. And then, yeah. Fun facts, I guess. I don't know why I felt the need to share that. It probably was only
ruin
negative.
You mentally right now.
We're already
guys, we're going to go to an ad break. I don't know if we're going to come back.
Oh, God. Oh, goodness.
I'm destroyed.
What's the last topic?
We've kind of talked about the scary part of moving and like how it could affect a kid. Do you think moving, whether from a childhood or kind of recently, has helped you grow at all?
Yeah, I think moving, especially once you're older, helps you get a more rounded vision of the world around you. So, for instance, there's a lot of people that decide to study abroad or go backpacking through a country or something. I think that taking the time to do that and making the conscious decision that you're going to discover the world a little more, and by moving around and just being in it, helps people become a lot more well-rounded and aware of the things around them, as opposed to someone who has lived in one spot in their whole life and doesn't know really firsthand what's going on other places. So that's part of why I would like to travel a little more, just to become a citizen of the world and really truly kind of grasp like, oh, this is what these people do. This is what their culture's like, and just kind of take part of a little bit of everything. I think that makes maybe not necessarily like better people, but I think it can help people feel more connected to the world around them.
Definitely. I think my scariest move was moving from mostly living small towns my entire life to moving to Austin, Texas, which is like the 13th biggest city in the United States.
Yeah, one of the fastest growing cities in the United States.
The fastest, I believe. It was very spooky, just like not only am I moving away from everyone that I know, but also I am changing everything that I do know from small town to like this big city living. And that was really spooky, but going there, I think it's my most favorite places I've ever lived. It showed me that I really like city living, that I'm not necessarily a country kid. So I was like, wow, this is like, in retrospect, it was like one of the most beneficial things I've ever done, because it gave me perspective on the world. But then I had to come back. No, at the moment, that's how I felt, because I was like, oh, I finally like found my way here, and I think I'm really excited for senior year. And then my parents wanted to come back. Then I rekindled my friendship with you, and now we're doing this. And so when I think of like turns of events and things like that, it really like shows you the serendipity of the world, how just like one little thing can cause a bunch of other things, and how sometimes you just can't control it. And I think moving has shown me that a lot, because it's like, wow, I learned this thing that I would have never learned if I hadn't done that. Or I rekindled this friendship that I never would have gotten and probably wouldn't have with someone else right now if I hadn't moved back. And so it's crazy to think about like that. And I think it gives me more perspective on my own life in tandem with more perspective in the world.
It's really beautiful, man.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, that sounded a little
Let me ruin it.
But yeah, no, I thought that was great.
Thinking about that made me think about how you want to be a film director, and how you inevitably will have to move at some point away from this small Kansas town.
What?
To Austin or
Wait, nobody told me I'd have to move.
Oh, whoops. Am I dropping the ball?
Uh-oh.
Oh, my bad. I'm the most educated Phil person you've ever met. Whoops.
Oh, God.
But yeah, so you have to like move to Austin or Atlanta or LA probably. And do you feel excited for that? How do you think going to a place like that would change your routines? Do you think having a job that would be inspiring to you would make that easier? Or
I look forward to it with very cautious optimism. So part of like even making the move here, and I had like these kind of ideas of what it would be like and everything, because, you know, I grew up in a much smaller place than even where we're living now. And then I went to a school that was much smaller than the school we go to now. And there I was the only person who did what I do. And so coming here, I was like, cool, I'm going to have a bunch of challenges when it comes to people who are better at editing than me, better at this and that than me. But what I initially saw kind of let me down a little bit as far as like challenge went. But the real challenge actually came with setting into the routine and setting into new social norms and figuring out what people like here, because this city has a completely different feel than anything else. So moving here and like making like kind of the stair step move to here, and then eventually like the big step of moving out to one of those bigger places, I think along the way I've kind of learned to expect the unexpected. And moving to one of those big places and having a job in mind is definitely like a driving force. Not only a driving force behind me moving to one of these places, but also a driving force behind me making it work in one of these places, you know?
Do you think that having some incentive at the end makes changing a routine more beneficial?
Yeah, I think that having that incentive to change your routine is almost always necessary. Like if you take someone who's living their like happy life with their 9 to 5, and you know they've got a house, they've got their benefits, they have their workout routine, if you tell them you should just like do this other thing instead, completely change your routine, you should work nights instead of 9 to 5, you should give up running in this for weightlifting or something, like changing things out for things that are essentially the same but just tweaked enough, I don't think you're gonna like have someone who's gonna willingly do that without incentive, you know? Like if it's like, oh, you could keep the routine you have, or you could change your routine and get no different things other than, I guess, perspective on what you're doing. So yeah, having the incentive to change it is definitely helpful.
And I feel like there's some times where it's beneficial to have a routine that may not feel beneficial, that may be harmful to you in the moment, but has lots of good incentives not necessarily associated with your routine. So you have to harm your routine for some benefits later. When I think of this, I think of when you started your job at Amazon. You had just completely switched your schedule, but it paid and it helped you get through like bills and stuff. And so I was wondering if there was a good balance between maybe upsetting your routine, but doing it for the benefits.
So in my experience there, if I could change anything, it would be that things weren't as harsh as they were. But just looking at it like as a, say, 100-mile view of it, just big picture, I think damaging your routine can do a lot of good. There was an interesting story I read that was talking about how changing a routine enhanced the relationship between a mother and son, because the mother had always kind of experienced pushback from the son and never really gotten anywhere in understanding like what they were about, really. Like I think they were probably about that like kind of teenage years where like they felt like they were misunderstood, and so they kind of made it a little worse anyways. The mother had like lost a friend and just gone to their funeral, and so she took a 3-day vow of silence, and in that 3 days she upset her routine of how she interacted with her son, and in doing that her son opened up more to her because she wasn't, you know, enforcing this other side of their sociological routine or whatever. And so she learned more about his dreams and his aspirations and whatever. And that's not to say that that's always going to happen with every situation, but I think that upsetting your routine in very specific ways can lead to results you didn't expect, you didn't see coming. And as an individual who likes to grow and learn more every day, I see that as an absolute win.
Kind of to wrap it up, it can be hard to change a routine, but it can cause growth and it can make you stronger and give you perspective on the world. I wanted to see what you thought important factors into acclimating to a new environment are. What are the things that really help you grow into a new environment?
finding routines, whether they are built in or not, is always extremely beneficial. So having something you can fall back on and do that will keep you in the right mental state to be there. Because I feel like a lot of people worry when they move to these bigger places about, oh, am I going to have enough money for rent? Am I going to have enough money to feed myself? Am I going to have a job? Like all of those kinds of very physical, tangible things. And they tend to neglect what is most important, which is your brain. You got to have time set aside to think about yourself, a little bit of introspection. In my opinion, I think it's very important to keep yourself in that in a positive mental state, because without that, you're not going to be able to continue with your jobs. You're going to get burnt out. You're going to find yourself depressed and unable to carry on. Whether or not you've ever experienced depression before, it can manifest itself in these new situations because your body hasn't been in this situation before. It's in a new place. It's with new people. It's with new stresses that you've never worried about before. So things are going to happen mentally that maybe you've never prepared for. And so preparing yourself for that is probably the best thing to do.
It can be really hard to know to do these things in the moment, and that's part of the reason we're here, is to help you guys kind of work your way through some situations, maybe have a little more wisdom, or maybe just have someone that kind of feels like they're going through what you've gone through. I thank you guys for joining in on this episode of Noah Asked. I hope you check out our other stuff at Humorish. We have another podcast, I don't know though, and we have some YouTube videos of gameplay out now. We have a lot of places you can contact us in the description, and thanks again for stopping in.
Yeah, we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I like you.
See ya. Have a good one.
It's over.
In a while.
We're done.
Crocodile.
They're not listening. The music's playing over this.
No, it's okay. Hey, have a good one, man. I'll see you later.
Roll the outro.
No, bro.
Please. Noah,
okay.
you're the editor. Why
Stop
isn't the
doing
outro
it.
started yet?
Hey, it's okay, bud. Have a good one.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this Humorish podcast. If you want to see our sources for this episode, check the description for our citations page. As always, you can email topic submissions to humorish.tm@gmail.com and talk to us on Twitter using the hashtag NoahAsked. The podcast music was Watercolors by Vic DeVee.